Good morning, everyone. My name is Richard Sloma. Welcome to today's New York State Archives presentation of Get Ready for Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund 2025-2026. This session is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. If you have questions, we ask that you type them into the chat feature to the right side of your screen. And when you do, please identify the type of local government you are associated with. For example, a New York City agency, town, county, fire district, an authority, for example, that would help us in answering your questions. And now at this point, I will turn the presentation over to Maria.
Thank you, Rich. Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm here today with my fellow records advisors, Sarah Durling. She covers school districts. Jamie Brinkman, she's our newest advisor. She covers all villages and cooperative extensions. Michael Martin, he covers towns. And Monica Hauck-Whealton, she covers counties, libraries, and other miscellaneous governments. And we're here today to help you get ready for LGRMIF 2025-2026. Before we begin, I just want to tell you what we do know about the next grant cycle. There will be one. There will be a 2025-2026 grant cycle. The application guidelines are not available yet. We are hoping that they will be soon. And when they are, we'll schedule another webinar to kick off the new cycle. But we anticipate or hope that it will begin soon. The 2024-25 guidelines, that's our current cycle, those are available now. And pretty much except for the timeline and the deadlines, the 2025-2026 version will be almost the same. All of the same requirements, project categories, budget and project narrative questions. So you can use those to start planning and even writing your application offline. And we encourage you to write offline first anyway. We always tell people it's never too early to start planning your project and working on content for the application. So that's going to be our focus today. And this is our agenda. I'm going to start with a general overview of what LGRMIF is, who can apply, what the money can be used for, how to get started. We're going to focus on what information is needed for the application. And I will stop periodically for about 5 minutes, and my fellow records advisors and I will take your questions. We'll also take them at the end. And I'll also point you to loads of resources that we have available to you to use after the webinar to plan your project and content for the application. Okay, so what is LGRMIF? As Rich said, it is the Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund. It's a state archives non-matching annual grant program. It's been around for about 35 years. The funds are to help local governments establish records management programs, address problems with existing records, reinvigorate records management programs, or expand them to build in new ways of managing records. The funds come from fees collected by county clerks and the New York City Register for recording of selected documents and for the assignment by county clerks of index numbers for certain court cases. So the amount of grant funding that we have available each year depends on the number of documents recorded and index numbers assigned that year. So who is eligible? I'm pretty sure most of you on this webinar are New York State local governments, and you are required to appoint a records management officer and adopt the LGS1 by the application deadline. So you're at the top of this list. And then there are also a lot of New York City mayoral agencies here. And those agencies, by law, we set aside $1 million for the grants, for their grants. Those grants are administered by New York City Department of Records and Information Services. They're known as the DORIS grants. And everyone in the middle, you're all eligible, but I encourage you to refer to the eligibility section of the application guidelines for the unique details about your eligibility. And then you can contact us if you have any questions about them. So what can the funds be used for? The grants fund records management projects under 5 categories: disaster management, inactive records, historical records, files management, and document conversion and access. And there are examples of project activities listed in the application guidelines under each category. And I also have some examples on the slide. So for example, under disaster management, you can use funds to develop a disaster plan for records in all formats. That can include creating the plan, implementing it, testing it, and even hiring a consultant to develop the plan. Under the inactive records category, this could involve records in any format, implementing a records program to manage those records, inventorying the records, identifying the records, applying retention, weeding obsolete records, organizing and setting up a physical records room or network storage, or the physical records room could also include remodeling work and also the purchase of record storage equipment, among other things. Under the historical records category, funds could be used to develop historical records programs. You could hire an archivist to do arranging and describing of historical records, a conservationist to conserve historical records. You could plan programs to make historical records available to the public or to schools for educational uses. You can develop a plan and a system to maintain and preserve permanent electronic records. The files management category is very specific and focused. You can only work on paper records under this category, and it involves implementing a new filing system on actively used paper records, usually one record series, case files, for example, to improve access to those records. And that project could also involve the purchase of new filing equipment. Document conversion and access often involves digitizing paper or microfilm records. It could also include the purchase and implementation of an electronic content management system. It could involve organizing born digital records on your network. It could involve developing procedures for managing electronic records, among other things. So how do you get started? Well, we would greatly appreciate it if you would, as soon as possible, have your records management officer register for an account in eGrants. Setting up an account does not mean that you must apply, but if you're thinking about applying, we'd appreciate it if you would do that now. We're a little short-staffed in the grants unit. At the same time, if you could please check your government's SED-REF account information. So the State Education Department has a database with account information on local governments, and if you've received funds in the past, you've got information in the database. You want to make sure that that information is up to date because it populates part of your application, and you want to make sure all of your application information is correct and current. If the information is not correct, we would like you to complete a standard data capture form and email that to the grants unit. And I'll show you where you can find these later in the webinar. They all are available on our grants webpage, and the URL is at the bottom of this slide in the find box. We also want you to meet with your records advisor to discuss your project, eligible expenses, and also application requirements. Please sign up for the local government newsletter if you haven't already done so. This is where we will announce the 25-26 application guidelines when they're available. You can start at any point in time developing your project plan and content for the application. And we're going to talk about that on the next slides. And when the new application guidelines come out, the 25-26, you want to be sure to review those, especially the timeline and deadlines. So I'm just going to stop here for a moment. Does anybody have any questions about what I just covered? Anything in the chat box yet, Rich?
No, nothing yet, Maria.
Okay.
Oh, here's a question, Maria. How do we know who our records advisory officer is?
Yeah, that's a quick one, so I'll just answer that. They're all pictured and their contact information is provided at the end of this webinar. So it's based on government type, and you'll see that at the end of the webinar.
And two more quick questions here. One is, how can I apply? Can you apply to do different categories? And can we use funding for salaries?
Yes, you can fund professional and support staff to work on the project, and we don't encourage you to apply under two categories, but if you do, you would just need to make sure that you can prove that all of the work can be completed within the project timeframe, and you address all of the category requirements for whatever categories you apply under.
And have a question here. Can we use grants for environmental controls like HVAC?
Yes.
And have a question here. Are funds available for cost of offsite storage of records?
No. If it's not a facility owned by your government, we would not pay for the storage there, but you could buy equipment to set up storage there. You would have to, justify a case for using an offsite vendor, and we wouldn't pay for the cost to use that vendor, but you could buy equipment to, for example, set up shelving in a storage unit to maintain your records there.
And have a couple more questions. How do you sign up for a local government newsletter?
You can find our newsletters are on our contact page on the State Archives website. You can see our URL right down at the bottom of the slide, and go to the bottom of the page from our home address, click on contact and keeping in touch. And then I believe the newsletters are listed there. You want to sign up for the local government newsletter, or just ask your records advisor and they can sign you up or send you the link.
And have a question here too. How do we check to see if we have an account in the eGrants system?
You can contact the grants unit, and their email is archgrants@nysed.gov. Rich, if you could put that in the chat box. So you can ask. You can also log into eGrants. If you know your password, you may just, or if you know your username, you may just need to update your password. And you can ask your records advisor as well, and we can set you straight on that. You can also register, and we'll let you know once you register if you already have an account and give you direction from there. So I'll show you where the registration form is shortly, and then you can just register and we'll let you know either way.
Okay, and let's see, we have a question here. Can we sign up for SED client database, and is it required? Or how can we sign up for SCD client database, and is it required?
We will be paying you through the, um, okay, first register, we'll have you register for an eGrants account. And then you can check this database. There's a public portal. I'll show you where that is. And you can check and see whether or not your government is in the database. Then check the account information. If you don't find yourself in the database, you can contact your records advisor or the grants unit. We can let you know for sure whether or not you have an account, and then you can go from there.
Okay, and we also had a question about the link to access this recording today. Rather than waiting for it to be uploaded to YouTube, we'll probably have it uploaded to YouTube as early as today, so it'll be up there quickly, and an email will go out through our constant contact um, account telling people where to go. But worst case scenario, you could always go to our website, and you can access our recordings through our website as well. But we should have that up today.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, everybody, for the questions. I'm going to stop taking them right now, and I'm going to continue on just so we cover everything. And I will stop again for questions, and of course, we'll answer them at the end as well. Okay, so you must have a project plan to address the application project and budget narratives. And on the next slides, I'm going to cover what you need for the application with a focus on our two most popular project categories, document conversion and access and inactive records. So I'll give some examples associated with those. Even if you're not applying under those categories, there will be information that you can use for planning your project and content for the application. Okay, this is just a visual of a sort of before and after of an inactive records project. And if you really think creatively, it could also be a before and after of electronic records. So records that have been put in a central location, but there's really no organization or filing system. And the result of an inactive records project, whether the records are electronic or paper, could be an organized system for managing those records with lots of good indexing or good label information so that you know what records you have, you know their retention periods, you've weeded out all the obsolete records. You may have even developed a needs assessment plan and a records management plan and policies and procedures to maintain the new system in any format. If they're physical records, you could also modify a space for record storage. If they're electronic, you could purchase new equipment to manage those records, the electronic records, or set up a new filing system on your network. Physical records, you could purchase boxes, shelving, labels, and other supplies that we recommend for storage. This is what we recommend for physical records. This is what we recommend over here on the right-hand side, what you have in place before you even consider scanning records. Scanning records is one of our most popular projects, but we strongly recommend that you have a good sense of your physical records, their retention, and how they're used, so that you can use that information to scan only the records that you absolutely need to scan. And then you've also got good information to organize and index those records. I want to make another point on this slide. This is not a files management project if it involves physical records. Files management is a project that focuses on reorganizing and implementing a new filing system for paper records inside the box. So files management projects usually address case files that need new filing systems, like personnel files, building files, case investigation records, or court records. It could be a sub-project in an inactive records project. And if that's the case, so you might be this would be a situation where you'd be applying under two categories. The main category would be inactive records, but you'd be doing a sub files management project. And if so, you would need to address both of the project category requirements for files management and inactive records. So like I said, once the paper is organized, as it is on the left, and there's a system in place based on the records that you have, their retention and disposition, it's going to help you make meaningful decisions about what records are appropriate to scan and how they should be indexed. So this is by far our most popular project category, and scanning paper records is probably our #1 project. Like I said, you'll need a detailed project plan to address the application project budget, project and budget narrative questions. So a good project plan is going to involve all of the items on the left: project scope statement, description of issues, description of records, your plan, your goals, your work plan and timeline, and itemized expenses. That information can be used to complete the application questions. So they're over here on the right-hand side. A project summary statement, the statement of problem, which includes a description of the project records. Intended results, which is your project plan and the goals for the project. The plan of work, which is your work plan, your detailed work plan and a timeline. We're also going to ask you about contributions to the project, and then your project budget, which is your itemized expenses. The numbers next to the project and budget narratives are points that you earn based on how well the questions are addressed. So the first part of the application is a project summary statement. As I mentioned on this slide, there are no points for this section, but it is required for the application. So you want to keep it brief. It has to be under 2,500 characters, and that includes spaces. All you have to do here is describe the project scope, the objectives, and a description of the records involved. Save the details for the application narrative sections. However, the summary statement is usually the first thing that a reviewer reads. So you want to make sure that it does cover the scope, objectives, and description of records involved. It's straightforward and meaningful, and that can set the tone for the rest of the application. The statement of the problem is 2 parts. You earn 15 points for explaining the records management problem that the project will address and why it's a high priority for your records program. And you earn 10 points for describing the records with the criteria that's listed on the right-hand side of the slide. Number of images is necessary if you're doing a project involving scanning physical records or microfilm. The number of images anticipated. Everything else is required for each individual record series. And there's one exception to this, and this is written in the instructions in the application guidelines, the instructions for the project and budget narratives. If you're doing an inventory project, the purpose of the inventory is to get this information on all of your records that are involved in the inventory. So in that instance, you only need to provide a general overview of the departments whose records will be inventoried and the types of records that will likely be part of the inventory project. You will also need to determine the total volume of records intended for the inventory, because that's how you're going to calculate the rate of work for the inventory. And I'll talk more about that shortly. On the left-hand side of the slide, there's a list of key considerations for managing your records. And we have lots of resources at the end of the webinar that you can use to determine where your program may have problems or need improvements related to retention, and disposition, compliance, use and access, protection, security, or preservation, or where you may want to expand the capability of your records management program to address these things. The intended results section is also a two-parter, 15 points to provide an overview of the plan that you chose to address the problems that you describe in the first section, and explain why it's the best plan. So what else did you consider to arrive at your decision to address the records using this plan? And you earn 10 points to explain how you anticipate that the project will address the problems that you described in section 1A and how the results will benefit the records and your records management program. So I'm going to show you some examples of how information in the anticipated benefits section could be presented to show its relationship to the problems that you describe in section 1A. So this is an example for an inactive records project. The problems could be that the records have never been inventoried, there are no rules for filing access or retrieval, and obsolete records have never been destroyed. So the project may intend to create an inventory for all records, policies and procedures, train staff, identify obsolete records, and document them for destruction. And the records management benefits would be that the records are identified, retention is applied, you've got a program in place now with policies and procedures to support it and a commitment to maintain the project, and you're compliant with your retention schedule. Here's an example for a scanning project. The problems may be that access to a specific record series is time-consuming and expensive. Staff need access to the paper records, and that can make them difficult to use when multiple people want to use the records at the same time. You may not have a backup of the records in the event of a disaster. So the project may scan paper records, manage them with records management software, purchase licenses for authorized staff so multiple staff can have access to the records, create remote backups, which is a requirement for maintaining digital files, and that can prevent records loss or data loss in the event of a disaster. The plan of work is also two parts. 10 points to provide a timetable for your project that includes details on all project activities, those that you're budgeting funds for, and those that are going to be done in kind. You want to show everything to show reviewers that you've taken into consideration everything that needs to be done, and everything that needs to be done can be done within the project, the grant time frame. You want to include the duration for each activity, work rate calculations, which I'll show you some examples of in a moment, responsible parties, and then also detailed information about your project staff, including consultants and vendors. And you want to include estimated dates of work. Now that's a moving target in LGRMIF, but showing estimated dates is a way to show that you understand the deadlines involved in the grants program and that all of your work can be completed within those deadlines. You earn 15 points to address grant requirements in this section. Now, every category has requirements. You're going to apply under multiple categories. You've got to address multiple, the category requirements for both, or hopefully no more than two categories, but all of the categories that which apply to your project. Also, there are general application requirements. Those are listed on the slide: records focus, adherence to archives standards and guidelines, program support, and supporting documentation, which I'll talk more about shortly. And if your project is a shared services project, you would also want to address those requirements in this section. If needed, we have project steps for scanning projects found in our Managing Imaging Projects publication. We have project steps for inactive records, projects that involve an inventory, um, in our inventory and planning publication. These publications are in the application guidelines. If you use them online, they're hyperlinked. They're also available on our publications page. And we also have related webinars, and I'll show you those towards the end of the webinar. And we have publications and webinars related to disaster management, historical records, and files management best practices. And we provide guidance in those as well. So I mentioned in the project plan, you'll need to demonstrate rates of work. And we provide some standard rates in the application guidelines. So for example, the State Archives standard rate for inventory projects is 1 to 2 cubic feet of records per hour. And a standard banker's box is the equivalent of 1 cubic foot. And then below is an example of how you would calculate that rate based on the total volume of records involved in the project in cubic feet. So 1,200 cubic feet inventoried at a rate of 1 cubic foot per hour. If one person were doing it, it would take 1,200 hours. If in this case, it's 2 people working 30 hours per week, estimated to take about 5 months. This is really important because 5 months is a significant amount of time within the grant's time frame. And then estimated rates for basic prep that involves removing staples, flattening paper, and preparing records for a scanner. It could involve simple organization of the records. That is we provide a standard rate of 1,000 sheets per hour. And then the example shows how the amount of time needed to do that work could be calculated based on 178 cubic feet of records at 1,000 sheets per hour. Something you want to take into consideration in projects, particularly projects that involve scanning. There may be different kinds of prep, and you may be having the vendor do the most basic prep. So the pulling of staples and clips, flattening, unfolding, things like putting sticky notes on a separate sheet of paper for imaging, repairing small tears. A lot of people do have the vendor do this type of work, but your organization is going to have to do prep work to prepare individual record series for the vendor. So that can involve basically inventory work, and it might be done at a rate of 1 to 2 cubic feet per hour. You may even need more time depending upon what else is involved. So you will be identifying the record series, maybe pulling all the records together if they're filed in different locations, organizing the records, weeding duplicates and obsolete records. You may need to provide new folders, new labels, new boxes, and new box labels. If this is actually happening after you're awarded the funds, there may be things that you missed if you're looking at the records with a little more focus now. And if there's something that you missed, like some sort of a format that was not in your original proposal, like photographs maybe, you want to communicate those issues to your vendor so that they can reassess your proposal and let you know if they can actually image that different format. There may be things that you find that you don't want to have scanned, like CDs or DVDs, or you weren't planning on having them scanned, or maybe the vendor can't scan them. Maybe they're photographic negatives and those can't be scanned. So you'd want to mark the location of those items and pull them or put a note on them and let the vendor know that you don't want those items scanned. When you're sending the records to the vendor, you also want to prepare an inventory sheet. Make sure the box labels are complete. You may want to number the boxes in order that the records are sent to the vendor in a specific order. And you may also want to communicate to the vendor that you want the records returned in a specific order. So all of this can take time. You may want to do a test on a few boxes, see how long it takes you. You can use your own rate based on a test that you've done, but you would want to explain how you arrived at that rate. Local government contributions is the last question we ask in the project narrative. That'll earn you 5 points. This is a non-matching grant, but it looks good on the application if you are contributing something. And every project is going to require a project director. So at least, unless you're hiring the project director, you will be contributing the project director's time. You're asked for 3 things in this section. How are you supporting your records management program now without grant funds? If you have been funded by an LGRMIF grant in the last 5 years, how are you maintaining that project, or how have you been maintaining it in the past 5 years? Some examples would be policies and procedures, dedicated time and labor for records management, a budget line, annual software maintenance fees, staff training, management support by advocating and enforcing the policies and procedures. And then you're also asked, what are you contributing to the grant project? So like I said, could include project director's time, the allocation of space to process records or to develop a record storage room, IT services, staff time to prepare records, we just discussed, staff time to verify the content after the images are returned, quality control of the images and indexing, staff labor involved in moving records if the project involves physical records. All of that time should be anticipated in your plan of work, and you can calculate an estimated cost based on the time and that person's salary. So this information shows commitment to your records management program and also commitment to the success of the project. And that looks good in the eyes of a reviewer. Now the budget is 20 points. And if you have completed the narrative questions and you've got all your supporting documentation, then you should be able to glean that information from those in order to complete the budget. In the budget narrative, each item that you intend to purchase should be itemized, and then it should be justified in terms of reasonableness of cost, which is basically how was the budget item cost calculated, the suitability of the chosen solution. So is it an eligible expense? Does it meet project requirements? Is it appropriate for the project? Also the necessity of the expense to ensure the project's success. So why is the budget item needed? Scanning projects must itemize per image costs for things like prep, scanning, indexing, quality control, pickup and delivery. If you're purchasing software, the software has to be itemized. So the software system, any licenses that you are purchasing to use the software, any professional services of a software consultant, for example, all of that should be itemized. So when you're getting supporting documentation from vendors and consultants for an imaging project, you want to make sure all of these things are itemized. These are some example of supporting documentation under each of the 5 categories. Some you may or may not need. Some of them are required. There's some requirements under document conversion and access for a request for quotes, an RF or an RFQ. That's required if the cost for scanning is over 10,000. But you would also need an RFQ regardless of cost, because you've got to be able to provide scanning specifications to the vendor in order to get an appropriate quote. So it benefits any scanning project to attach an RFQ. I should have called this a preferred source vendor proposal. New York State Industries for the Disabled is one preferred source vendor for imaging, but there's also New York preferred source program for people who are blind. So two preferred source possibilities for imaging, and their proposal would have to be attached to your application as supporting documentation. Also, if you're purchasing software, a software quote, you may need one quote or you may need three, depending upon the cost of the software. A consultant proposal, if you're hiring support staff, which somebody mentioned, you would need to provide a salary rate for your support staff. If you're purchasing a scanner and computer to maintain the images going forward, quotes for a scanner and computer. If you've previously done an inactive records project that identified record series for imaging, attach that as evidence to show that you've gotten a recommendation from a consultant to image the particular records that are involved in the project. And then there are similar supporting documentation items for each of the project categories. I'll let you read through those. This is just a reminder of the need for a request for quotes or an RFQ, and when you need 3 quotes. This information is also in the application guidelines, but you need an RFQ if you're purchasing equipment, software, or services of one vendor with a cost over $10,000, or you're remodeling and one activity or one contractor is receiving over $10,000. And you need 3 quotes with an RFQ. And the only exceptions to that are if you're purchasing services and supplies that are off-state contract, or for New York City mayoral agencies off the New York City's Department of Citywide Administrative Services contract, or if you're purchasing services from a preferred source vendor. So most imaging projects require an RFQ, but then only one quote from the preferred source vendor. If you're working with BOCES or you have a local procurement, for example, for you've got a contract in place with an imaging vendor already, then you would only need one quote, or from a sole source vendor. This is an example of information to include in a document conversion and access project that involves scanning, so the RFQ information. The RFQ is basically your scanning specifications, and it can include information like the name of the organization, the name and arrangement of each record series that's going to be involved in the project, total number of images, condition of the images, any preparation requirements, the required image format that comes from our digital imaging guidelines, required indexing, and other requirements that are either associated with technical needs or processing needs. And then on the right-hand side are examples of what the details might look like that you're including in your specifications. There is a sample of imaging specifications that can be found in the Managing Imaging Projects publication. And then your scanning requirements are found in the Digital Imaging Guidelines. So just a reminder that projects must be managed. This is a big part of a successful LGRMIF project. If you intend to apply for a grant, somebody must be committed to being the project director. Their name will be included in the application, and they are generally directing the project before and after the award. So this person should have a good sense of what this role entails, the amount of time that's going to be needed to be the project director, and ideally they should have some experience with project management. The project director is going to direct project planning and development They're going to ensure that the project runs smoothly after you receive the award, and they're going to make sure that all of the project goals have been met. If no one's doing this, it can lead to unrealized expectations, it can lead to errors, and it can sabotage the entire project. So if errors are found too late in a project, it may be too late to do anything about them. It could also cost your organization more money to address them if the errors are found after the fact. You can use grant funds to hire a project director if needed. So on the left-hand side are all of the areas that a project director would need to manage, and on the right-hand side, details about those areas. These are some things that a project director planning and directing an inactive records project may need to oversee on the left-hand side before the project, and on the right-hand side to plan the plan of work in the application, and also to actually do once the project is underway. And you can find information on steps involved in inactive records projects in our inventory and planning guide, planning publication, and guidance on storage of inactive government records if you're going to be developing an inactive record storage room. And we also have guidance and tools for electronic systems and records inventory work. And this is an example of things that a project director planning and directing an imaging project may need to oversee to plan the application content and then to undertake the project, and also things that you would want to include in your project plan of work in the application. Our Managing Imaging Projects publication and Digital Imaging webinar cover many of the project planning steps for a scanning project. And the Digital Imaging Guidelines cover the requirements for image creation. And then we also have a quality control and content verification publication that can help you plan your steps for content verification and quality control after the images are created. Project directors should plan periodic review points to check on how the work is progressing to ensure that the project stays on time and also within the budget. There's also opportunities if, for example, you have funds left over that you can purchase something additional that's related to your project. So you want to determine that early on in the project so you can contact your records advisor and make arrangements for an amendment. You also may want to move funds from one budget code to another. That would also have to be done through your records advisor. And so you want to determine that early on so you can do that before the amendment deadline. Imaging projects need to plan and time to test images and indexing before completing the work. Also to verify the content of all the images that are created. And if you do this in batches, it can help make the work less tedious, and you can identify any issues early on so that the vendor can address them. You want to make sure you've got enough time to review image content so that your contract doesn't end before the review process is complete. Regular communication is also going to be important with all parties involved in the project. And final reporting, so completing our final reports in that are part of the application. The final reporting is a requirement for the project, and it's required to receive the last 10% of the award. And basically, the questions that we ask in the final reports are intended to assess the results of the project. So this information is as important to you as it is to us. And it's essential for planning a subsequent project, especially if you want to apply for grant funds for a subsequent project. It can help you determine what you were able to accomplish, what worked, what didn't work, if any lessons or best practices were determined, It can help prevent repeating mistakes. If you plan, if there is something that you weren't able to accomplish in your project, you need to document it here. So if you want to use grant funds to address the same record series, maybe because it was too large and you weren't able to scan the entire thing, or there was something unanticipated, document that here so that reviewers can look at that information and know that the next project is not an ineligible redo involving the same record series, or that it's not addressing records that have accumulated since a previous project. Okay, I'm going to hold this request for questions. I just want to point out our resources at the end, and then we'll start taking questions. So we've got a lot of resources available. I specifically wanted to point out this is a screenshot of our grants web pages. This is the home page of the Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund. When you get to that page, you get the URL on the right-hand side on the slide. In the screenshot, second paragraph, you see a hyperlinked registration form. This is where you're going to register for the eGrants account. Everything is done online. Your records management officer has to do that. So that's where you'll register for an account in eGrants. You can do it even if you already have an account. We'll let you know if you've already got an account. So fill out the registration form, submit it, and then there's a left-hand menu in the image. If you click on eGrants, applying for a grant or apply for a grant, in that section, you'll find the application guidelines. Scroll down to standard data capture form. In those paragraphs, you'll find a link to the SED-REF public portal. Click on that link. There's instructions for finding your organization in the SED-REF database. That's where you're going to check your account information. In the same or the second paragraph, you'll find a standard data capture form. It's hyperlinked. You complete it online, you save it, and then email it to the grants unit. You only need to complete the standard data capture form if you need to update your information in the SED-REF public portal. There's also information on minority and women business enterprise requirements. There are some of those for our project. There's guidance on that and forms. The forms don't have to be submitted with your application. You can defer that until you receive the award. If you do receive the award, every project, unless the project is under $25,000, every project has to complete MWBE forms. So you're either going to do them with the application or after the award within 30 days, unless your project is under $25,000. There are FAQs, and there are also current and previous awards listed on this page. And those might be a good resource because you could review the list if there's a New York City agency or a local government that you recognize. You could contact the records management officer and get some intel about their project. Talk to them about what worked and what didn't work for them. Ask them about resources or ideas for materials, supplies, equipment, software, vendors, consultants, things like that. Review the 25-26 grant application guidelines when they come out. All the same information that's in the 24-25 is going to be in the 25-26. The big difference will be the timetables and deadlines. So that's the section you want to make sure that you check. We've got webinars on the program, 9 of them. We've got publications that are in the application guidelines. If you use them online, they're hyperlinked, but they're also on our publications page. The URL is at the top of this slide. And we've got webinars recorded on inactive and document conversion topics, but also disaster management, files management, and historical records. And Here are your records advisors. These are the governments that they cover, so contact the appropriate person. We can help you plan your project, talk to you about eligible expenses, talk to you about application requirements and the guidelines. Whatever you need, we are here to assist you with your project. And now we'll take your questions.
Okay, Maria, we have a bunch of different questions here. Let's go start at the beginning. Got a question here from Jenny, who was with a fire department. If you have one in the past and used a vendor for the work, is it a benefit to use that same vendor a second time if applying for a second grant, or is it better to work with multiple vendors?
You should work with the vendor who you work well with, who can meet your project requirements and do a good job for you. It's completely up to you. Oh, yeah, and it was me. I cover fire districts and departments, so I was the appropriate person. Yeah. So
Okay.
use the vendor who works well and meets all of your requirements.
Okay, you have a question here from Camille, just general about the grant. When entering the grant application, is there a space restriction or word count for each category?
Well, I'll just answer that only the summary statement has a character limit of 2,500 characters, including spaces. You can write to your heart's content in all of the project budget and narrative sections. And the more detail, the better.
Have a question here from Mike. Didn't put in what type of government, but once paper records are made digital, is there a requirement to retain the paper records? This would, oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. He did say this would be for a building department records, which are to be retained permanently.
Michael, you want to take that one?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So if you are scanning the records and the records are scanned according to our imaging guidelines, you can then get rid of the paper records if you've done a few things. If you make sure that they're the right resolution and the right format, again, following our guidelines, but you also have to do this process called verification. And verification ensures that what is on the original document has been captured in the digital image. And that has to be done for every single image, every single map, plan, whatever you may have. And only then can you get rid of the paper, because since these records are going to be kept for longer than 10 years, you have to make sure that those records, you have to make sure that the right format and that information is captured before you destroy the paper, because once you destroy the paper, there's nothing to go back to. But there's no requirement that they need to be kept as paper as long as you are following your imaging guidelines and can maintain them for the full retention period as the digital image.
Thanks, Michael. We have a question here from Karen. For special historical records, is having the vendor do scanning on the municipal site acceptable?
Would anyone like to take that? Or I'll be happy to answer it. Well, yes, it is acceptable, but you would want to justify your reasons for scanning in-house versus sending the records to a vendor. There could be a lot of good reasons for that, but you just want to make sure you explain those in your application.
Okay, I have another question here from Mike, who was with a building department. Is a preferred source vendor, meaning NICID, mandatory or preferred?
So if you are working on a scanning project or an imaging, it is a requirement to contact one of the preferred source vendors first. However, for other projects, there is no necessarily preferred source. It's really for the scanning and imaging projects. Document conversion and access as a category.
Okay, I have a question here from Bonnie. She does apologize here, the saying that the questions are long and detailed. In 1A, category requirements. In one place, you ask us to describe our adherence to archive standards and guidelines, as well as in the category requirements for imaging activities. You ask, how will you follow standards outlined in the State Archives digital imaging guidelines? There's an overlap in the answer to these questions. Should we state them twice, combine them, or tailor our answers differently for one versus the other?
I can answer that. Uh, when it comes down to it, the reason we list it twice is because for that particular category, there's a specific guidance document that you need to cite. For example, you need to talk about what resolution and what file format you use for the records. But when it comes to things that looks like we're asking the same thing in different ways, in different sections, don't be afraid to repeat yourself. Just make sure to provide enough content so that panelists can understand what you're doing and how it relates to both questions, whether it's in one section and another or two questions within the same section.
Thanks, Monica. Also from Bonnie, another question along those lines. In 1B, category requirements, record focus, item 2 asks us to describe how the projected costs are based on the records involved. Is there a budget answer sought here? Then what we need to describe in question, I'm sorry, is there a, let me repeat that. So item 2 in 1B, category requirements records focus, asks us to describe how the projected costs are based on the records involved. Is there a different answer sought here than what we need to describe in question 5, project budget, the description of the costs?
I'll do this one too. In section 1B, you need to describe the records. If you haven't done an inventory yet, as Maria pointed out, that's going to be a bit less information. But if you already know what you have, you're going to want to talk about, we have this volume of records. They're in these sizes. And if you're going to be imaging them, well, this percentage are double-sided. So we really have this many images. And you're going to want to talk about what kind of processing work is going to need to be done with the records. Oh, these have a ton of staples that are going to need to be pulled out, or there are minimal fasteners, or they're really delicate, so it's going to take a bit of extra time for staff to process them. And you don't necessarily go into how much time it's going to take in 1B, but this is where you set up a description of the records that will be used later to say, well, it's going to take this amount of time. And since I pointed out in 1B that I have this volume of records, that's part of the calculation to determine how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost.
Hey, Monica, can I chime in? Because it looks like the way Bonnie structured her question, it's more, this is the first part of the question, second part of the question. So I don't think she's necessarily asking about the section 1B. More
Oh,
than,
yes. I'm sorry, Sarah, you're absolutely correct. Please go on.
no, but so potentially, yes, we are potentially asking for different information. For example, in the records focus, we're going to be wanting to know how you came to figure out that this is going to take this many hours to do this work, which is going to total into the cost of how the work is done. So you need to hire, a staff member or temporary staff or a consultant to do the work. And you've calculated that they're going to need this many hours to do that. And that's what you're going to discuss in that records focus, as well as the stuff that Monica just talked about, the condition of the records and what's causing that. But when you get to the budget, when we're talking about, we're hiring temporary staff, you also have to explain why you're paying them as much money as you're going to be paying them alongside how many hours you need them for, and justify that, we're paying them the going rate for this position in our government, for our government type, or, and we need them for this many hours, therefore it's going to cost us this much. And then you're going to go down to the section where it's going to talk about like benefits and, explain how much you're going to you're requesting for benefits based on the amount of money that you've asked for already and justified earlier. So, I mean, it's not always a straight replication of what's in one section or the other, but you do always want to ensure that if you are asked to explain something in a section, that even if it is duplicative, you explain it in that section because the reviewers are expecting to find it in that section. So, I know that's a concern, but There is some nuance, and then yes, there is some duplication.
Yes, and I would just add to, these are great questions to ask your records advisory officer. There's no question too difficult or complex. They'll be happy to help you out. So just reach out to them. So I'm going to move on here for Barbara. For hiring staff, can we hire qualified people who are already employed by the county, but in a different part-time position, and do the grant funds cover their benefits?
I can take that unless somebody else wants to. You can hire your staff. They have to be working outside of their normal hours. And in particular, if a town clerk is going to be hired or a village clerk, they would need to get, you would need to have attached to your application and approval from the board for them to work outside of their normal role, and then also explain how that role would be covered by another staff person while the person is working on the project. So you can hire staff and pay them outside of their normal hours. They can be paid their normal salary. If they're working overtime, you can pay them an overtime rate. It can include their benefits, but you have to make it clear that you're not double dipping there. So you can't pay them on their work time with the grant funds. They've got to be working outside their normal hours, or you have to show how someone else will be covering their position while they're working on the grants project.
Okay, thanks, Maria. I'm just going to say we are a little bit over time here, but I think we can squeeze in a couple more questions that are relatively short, it looks like. Jody asks, are there still restrictions on who in an organization can have an eGrants account, or is it the RMO only?
I'll take it. Yeah, no, it still has to be the records management officer. So if you have an account, but you have a brand new records management officer, you do have to apply for a new account in their name. That's just how we handle and keep track of how many folks are applying for projects.
Okay, and a final question here from Matthew. Is a city a miscellaneous government with Ms. Hauck-Whealton, our RAO, or not? Is that not the
That would be
case?
me, Maria McCashion. I cover cities, New York City mayoral agencies, all cities in New York State, and fire districts.
Okay, and with that, we're a few minutes over, but I would just encourage folks to contact your records advisory officer. And as I mentioned, we should have this webinar recording up by the end of today. Any final words, Maria?
Thanks everybody for attending. We had a good number, and we are here to help you with your projects. So don't hesitate to contact us. We can set up a meeting, discuss all of the things that you would like to know about planning the project, application content, and requirements for your project.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.